Hello, Praggies, and welcome back to another episode of Pragmatic Optimists. I'm State Senator Tiara Mack, joined by Rachel, who is an attorney, and together we are offering some pragmatic outlooks on the news today. There has been a lot since the last time we checked in, including Trump has now ordered the National Guard to enter into DC to quote unquote make it safe again by removing people experiencing homelessness and also threatening to arrest any of the criminals. There's also been a lot of action around the police state, including some riots in LA last week around ICE raids, and then the expansion of Netanyahu's genocidal plan in Palestine to take seize of not just Gaza, but recently expanded to the central camps and Muwasi. What we're seeing here, friends, is an expansion of the police state. The more we see the attacks on the most vulnerable communities, not just in our country, but its applications around the world that, of course, trickle back into the United States. Most of our law enforcement agents are trained in Israel. So anything that we see happening across the waters and in countries that we have partnerships with is likely to take hold right here in our country. And it's devastating to see the impacts that we see, especially when it comes to our communities experiencing homelessness. We talked a little bit earlier in one of our other shows on the attacks of homelessness on people experiencing homelessness in the Supreme Court with the Grants Pass versus Johnson decision and some of the trickle effects. The only way that we can address homelessness is not simply by removing them from states' capitals or putting them in prisons. It's to build quality housing. It's to have wraparound services, and it's to prioritize homelessness as a human right. The most likely people to experience homeless in our country are veterans, people who are experiencing mental health, chronic mental health disorders and other chronic health conditions, and children, because when a parent who's making a minimum wage can no longer keep up with the increasing cost of rent, them and their dependents become homeless. And so as we continue to think about who these vulnerable populations are, many of us know someone who is much closer to homelessness than they are to having housing stability, especially with the skyrocketing cost. So Rachel, I know that is just a taste of what we're going to discuss in our episode today. And I hope we can end with a little bit of optimism, but it is police state central right now. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what you made of all the news over the last week.
I think that this has been a particularly brutal stretch of the news cycle. And I recognize that that's very likely to get worse before it gets better. But one of, I think, the most important pieces of this barrage of news, or one of the most important intentions of it, is to make it so that we don't have time to connect dots and we don't have time to hold people accountable. And I've been thinking a lot over the last weekend about Hannah Arendt's kind of theory of the tyranny of bureaucracy, that the least accountable governments are those where we don't know exactly who to hold accountable because there are so many structures impeding our access to officials. And I think that much of what we're seeing is inspired by that line of thinking, but it's important to remember that in the United States, we do actually still know who needs to be held accountable. And the reason that it feels like we don't, the reason that we all feel so helpless is because they aren't listening to us. But it's not because we don't know who they are, you know? And so I think that that is something that I've really been trying to counter and beat back and think about a lot more, is that the last couple of times that I've called my senators, I got straight through on those calls in ways that were not happening a year and a half ago, every time there was an escalation in Gaza. Whereas now I can just call and get straight through. And that tells me that people are not calling. The lines are not busy enough. I'm getting pickups and answers. And so I think all of this is intentional, right? We're getting this barrage of news. They're trying to tire everybody out. I probably sound very tired. It's because I am. I know that you are as well. I know that our listeners are as well. Like, it's been a really long fight for a really long time in a lot of places on a lot of fronts. And so we don't need to beat ourselves up for being tired. We need to give ourselves some rest. But I think that a lot of people think that or maybe not explicitly think this, but treat the antidote to tiredness as checking out as opposed to resting and returning. And I think that checking out makes us a little bit less tired for a little period of time, certainly, but then contributes to like upholding these structures that are going to come for many of us, if not all of us. So that's kind of like my high level thought. A couple of things on the individual pieces that I want to touch on before we get back to, I think, this broader police state notion, and also hopefully talking about some mutual aid and organizing that has been done effectively that we can learn from in order to combat the police state, at least in our local communities. Number one, this kind of takeover of DC or federalizing the guard, I want to be very careful here as the attorney on the show about the language that we use when it comes to the DC National Guard, because one of the theories, I told you before we started filming that there was a theory that I wanted to confirm all of like the facts it rested upon were actually correct as I envisioned them in my head, and they were. I think that one of the reasons that Trump is coming to like DC next, as opposed to any of the other large blue cities in the country, is because the posture of the National Guard in DC is different because the District of Columbia is technically under federal control. And so sending the National Guard into DC, the National Guard's not only already, it's just the DC National Guard that we're talking about. They have their own National Guard, so they're already there. And also, it's a different posture than when the president federalized the National Guard in order to send them into LA in California, because the California National Guard is supposed to report to Governor Newsom, but the DC National Guard doesn't report to the mayor of DC, Muriel Bowser. It reports directly to President Trump. And so I think there's likely going to be some movement on the court cases where Gavin Newsom challenged the federalizing of the National Guard out in California this week, if not today. And just to be clear, in case we don't get this up today, it's Monday. And so I think that one of the reasons why President Trump is turning his attention to DC is because people are going to be really confused by that. And it's going to feel like, I know that Mayor Bowser's not responding in the same way that Mayor Newsom has. And I think that we can definitely discuss whether or not we think her response should be stronger. I certainly think it should be. But she doesn't have the same tools in her arsenal as Gavin Newsom does, even beyond just the optics of Newsom having like a larger national profile already, being a white dude, like the things that come with that, having a giant state as opposed to a small, what's functionally a municipality, even though it's a federal territory. And so I think that this is the first time in a while that I think we've seen the Trump administration go after a weak target, because they have been punching at like the heavy hitters over and over and over again, and are now turning to an area that is not a heavy hitter, not because DC isn't a heavy hitter, but because the legal posture there is very different for these things. And so and the mayor is very differently situated than the governor of fucking California. And so I kind of feel like maybe that's a piece of a little bit of optimism. It's a tiny thread to pull upon, but going for DC next, as opposed to federalizing the guard for ICE enforcement in a city like Chicago or New York, which I think would be the next like punching up, right? Like trying to take out these heavy hitters, indicates to me that this is certainly not a retreat, but that they don't have the ammo to keep like punching and punching and punching above their weight. Yeah. So that's my DC National Guard point.
No, I think I want to pull that thread a little bit more. And I think it's super important. There's two states that you mentioned, LA in California, Chicago and Illinois, are two heavyweight contenders for the Democratic presidential run. These are J.B. Pritzker, favorite.
We love Big Pritz.
We do love Big Pritz and his big bucks. And he is someone who can stand toe to toe with Donald Trump. And he's been in the news lately, especially protecting some of the Texas Democrats who fled and have allegedly, but also unclear if the FBI has also been involved in the search for the Democrats who've been also on their social media and having press conferences openly saying where they are. So I don't know why the FBI would need to be involved in a civil matter of a state not having quorum. And then California, Gavin Newsom, who is also another presidential favorite for the next election. And time and time again, he has been met with opposition. He's been met with a pushback. And those LA riots that we saw last week, I saw them on Blue Sky mostly, didn't really see them reach the mainstream media, have been met with tons and tons of protests and people in the street, massive arrests, massive movements. I saw independent journalists who were arrested over the weekend in in LA over some of the Home Depot riots and the raids. And I think it's also interesting to note that the communities that he continues to go after are also some of the most vulnerable communities that are often forgotten in our communities. Most people don't think about our homeless neighbors. Most people don't think about people who are experiencing homelessness or who are in our shelter systems or people who are in and out of the precarious and dwindling support systems for people who are unhoused in our country. And I think that tide is unfortunately going to change. I've been looking at funding for homeless programs across our nation. HUD is seeing massive cuts, and we're going to see a rise in people who have been on the edge of homelessness or have been experiencing housing insecurity. And we're going to see more and more neighbors, even just in my own state. I've seen more and more encampments. I've seen more and more tent cities, and I've seen more people relying on places like food banks in order to get their food. And we're only going to see that increase as the federal budget cuts continue to impact states, their budgets, and their ability to keep people who are low wage workers and chronically homeless safe. And I think it is showing the weakness of this administration. Time and time again, we see states are finding ways to push back against the narrative. Over the last couple of weeks, the big topic in the news has been the Texas power grab. And with the Texas power grab for redistricting, we've also seen states like California and like New York say, well, we are also going to start redistricting maps. So lots of people are finding ways to push back, and we are tired. We are seeing some of the sexier headlines. We're seeing like gerrymandering bad, let's stop it, and let's not have a power grab. But then we're not seeing some of these smaller stories. And I was looking at the CDC, and I've been seeing an increase of these radicalized young people who are going into places like the NFL headquarters or the CDC for mass shootings. And we're continuing to see these smaller stories that I think will explode into larger stories of these threads that are being pulled with this administration that has used fear and misinformation and strategic misinformation campaigns to pull a group of people into this alt-right space that muddies the waters of what should we be connecting the dots for, Rachel. And I think that's something that I want to continue to focus my optimism on, is that there are people who every single day, whether they are tired or not, who decide, I am going to be making sure that I'm drawing the dots for the most marginalized people, because as we continue to see, these attacks are not stopping. We are 7 months into this administration at this point now, and the attacks are not slowing down. Even though we have Congress on recess, we are still seeing so many people go to town halls. We're seeing people stand up and fight back in those town halls, hold their elected leaders to account. We're seeing people saying this is not a bipartisan issue. I saw this one woman, and I can't remember what state it was, but she's like, this is not about bipartisanship. This is about the issues. People are worried about healthcare. People are worried.
I think it was in Nebraska.
Nebraska.
Yeah, the Mike flood. Because, and the reason that I think I can get to that is because he's one of the only Republicans that has been willing to have a town hall. They're getting the direction, don't have town halls, don't have town halls, because people are so angry. Like the majority of people are with us.
Right. And I think that's what I encourage our Democratic leaders to also like be louder. We've had so many opportunities to really capitalize on the chaos in DC, and our Democratic leaders haven't necessarily stepped up in a way that shows that by the midterms, we need to have fierce leaders. That is, by next summer, there are going to be people on the ground who are going to be knocking on your doors saying, I want to be the next leader in your community, especially in Congress. And some of our senators are also going to be up for election. But we don't have the voices on the ground, I think, now, where people still have a mistrust of the Democrats. Yes, there's a lot of eyes on the Republicans, but there's a lot of eyes on the Democrats. What are you going to do? Yes, you are not the party in power, but what is your vision? What are you fighting for? How are you going to build stronger systems of support if you do get back the House, in order to ensure that our homeless communities are taken care of, that moms with children have food in their fridges and have opportunities for better lives, that we're not just addressing homelessness by moving into other communities, but that we're thinking about how do we get a new deal type situation where we're building affordable housing in every single community that needs it, because we haven't seen those investments in our lifetime at all. And we saw some area funding, but no building at that scale.
No, we really haven't. And I think that that's one of the things that I think gets lost in the kind of TikTokification of discourse around voting in federal level elections, right? And one of the reasons that I was so excited to be invited to come to Midas and to bring you with me is because I think that we are people that have been involved in electoral politics in a variety of capacities
since we were really young, like have cared about these systems. Were the kind of, I can't speak to your high school experience, but at least in my high school experience, I was the kid that was like talking politics all through the Obama election, you know? And I think that there's now this kind of group of people that have come to politics a little bit later who I think have been spurred by some of them just because they're younger, but also some because I think they've been spurred by like the frustration of the Trump administration. And a lot of them, and also lots of people that have been in this movement for a very long time, but I think are a little bit less vocal because they're really demoralized. Like, I think that being in this era of the United States has really made me realize why so many people that were like hippies out in the streets protesting Vietnam, they still show up, but they're a little quieter. And I think it makes, we've accepted this propaganda that they don't exist, that there's no such thing as like radical old heads, despite the fact that every single time you go to a protest, you see them all the time. And they're my absolute favorite people. Like, I am now getting a little bit far afield, but I want to name all of these things because it's the thing of the internet where it's like, if I don't say them, I don't want to see the comment of like, well, some people have been involved in politics for a long time and some people are new. Anyway, I think that we're really seeing a lot of people trying very hard to communicate why they're opting out of the political system and being met with, you caused Trump for us. You did this. You did this. And I want to be very clear that I think that people, particularly in states that are in play, need to be voting. I know that you were involved in a variety of different kind of federal level initiatives as a state level elected. And so when I say I see where those people are coming from, I don't mean like I was out telling people opt out of this system. It's terrible. I was out being like, listen, if you're a leftist that's not going to vote for president, I kind of get it at this point, but we really need you to vote because like we're going to hand over a congressional majority. We're going to hand over whatever. But even when I say that, like the fault there does not lie with individual people who are uninspired staying home. It lies with, and I don't even want to use the word fault, but like, I think when people berate the small group of Biden 2020 voters who stayed home in 2024, I think that they are not looking at full demos of voter turnout. If I'm totally honest, I think that they are not looking at the 40+% of some demographics that have not voted in a single election across 2020, 2022, 2024. And I think that there's this sense of, well, those people, that's a problematic thing because it is disproportionately voters of color that are very uninspired and have been over the last like chunk of time. Though again, for my sake of saying things out loud on the internet, to be very clear, it's white people's fault that Trump is in office because they do turn out and they vote for him. We vote for him. I can't take that piece of my identity and make it someone else's fault. Like, I think that there's this sense of like, those people are just never going to turn out, so let's not give them anything that they want. And it's like, but Zohran Mamdani says the most basic things that the group of uninspired voters are saying that they want. We want transformative care and we want like more affordable lives. And you had an incredible number of first-time voters, first-time primary voters, people that usually only vote in the general, like show up and vote for him, that are now going to stay activated because of him. And I say all of this because, to your point around, we've not seen that building in our lifetimes. I feel like there are so many notions of politics that the kind of 3-minute snips of political discourse that we get in this moment make us forget. Like we forget what's possible because we don't have time to sit and really go back and forth on what that has looked like, not just in other countries, but in the United States itself. We don't spend time talking about Reconstruction before it was defanged by the racist federal government. We don't spend time talking about the true vision of Martin Luther King Jr. and the effectiveness of the Black Panthers and the effectiveness of the Vietnam anti-war protesters. Like, and I'm even only learning about some of these things for the first time as I look into federalizing National Guard, and I'm seeing that that was like a Richard Nixon special in response to Vietnam War protests. And so there's there's a lot of history to be learned and there's a lot of strategy to understand that can't necessarily be discussed in short periods of time. But if I had to distill it down, what I would say over and over again is that you have huge portions of this country that feel like government is completely incapable of doing anything that is not destructive to them. And if you can come with a vision that says, actually, I agree with you, like this has been really destructive for a really long time, and we can fix it. I think that's reminiscent of the Obama kind of hope and change rhetoric of 2008 in particular. But we need to actually follow through. And I don't necessarily blame Barack Obama specifically for that. The Democrats did not unite behind the Barack Obama platform in the way that Republicans have now united behind Donald Trump's like neo-Nazi platform. And so there's lots of, maybe the real takeaway is like, there's no one person to lay blame at the feet of. And so if we can just all agree on that, like there's no group where it's like, that's your fault. And so every piece of it is your fault, then we can be forward looking and focus on Raphael Warnock. I saw him speak recently and he described it as we need to push back on the Trump administration so that we can then push forward when we regain power. Like we're not pushing back to get to where we were. We're pushing back to take control back so that we can then move forward, because people have been dissatisfied with this country for a very long time, justifiably.
Yes. And
almost a little optimistic. So I don't know if you want to bring into your optimism there.
Yes, I'll break into our optimism. I think exactly what you were saying there. We had a generation of young people who missed the Obama hope and change rhetoric. Like I was also involved in high school. I was one of a few young Democrats in a South Carolina high school. I also phone banked for Obama's 2008 campaign before I could vote. And that was my first election, Obama's 2012 campaign. And I think about the generation right after us who didn't have any of the Obama years. All they had was the chaos of the first Trump administration and then COVID. And so they haven't seen government really work for them. And I want to focus on the local level and why elections matter. If you're not going to focus on the national level stuff, the local level is so important. And there was a recent Tucson city council vote that just prohibited Project Blue, which is a data center that was going to be hosted by Amazon, from taking place in their community. All around the country, we've seen the devastation of what data centers are doing to communities, taking the water, increasing electricity bills, and also causing so much destruction to the natural landscape. And so these people were able to mobilize their city council and prevent them from voting yes on allowing this data center. And I think that's the power of seeing a government that works for people. It's the Zohran Mamdani case of we need to deliver for the most basic things at the smallest level of government possible. People don't believe government can work for them because, quite frankly, it hasn't worked for so many communities. Yep. People don't believe government works for them because even on the Democrat side, we still are capitulating to the billionaire donors and to the lobby class and to the people who are at the top of the party who are out of touch with the people who have been saying for too long, rent is too dang high, wages are too low, the federal minimum wage has not moved, states are now taking it upon themselves. Housing has kept a generation of young people, our generation, out of home ownership, and many people are putting off quote unquote typical life milestones because we don't have enough money to make ends meet. So I'm so excited to see things like Project Blue being defeated in Tucson, because it reminds us all that we can have hope in our local government. We can have hope that if we all mobilize and we have the tools that we need in order to fight back, we can successfully hold our elected officials accountable to what the communities need. And on that note, Praggies, I will leave you with that little bit of optimism. And please remember to like, subscribe, and share to Legal AF. This is Pragmatic Optimists with Tiara, Mack, and Rachel Cohen. And we will see you again on another episode. Take care, y'all.
See you next time.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.